Matt always believed he was building a future with Emily, the woman he planned to marry. But one night, everything shattered with a single notification on his phone. Emily had posted publicly, "I'm suffocating, I need freedom." There was no argument, no warning, no conversation leading up to it. Just hours earlier, Matt had gently brought up a simple boundary with her overly involved best friend, Jake. And now the whole world was watching her paint him as the villain of her story. As Matt reread her words, something inside him shifted. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. For the first time, he saw the truth of their relationship, what he meant to her, and what she expected him to be. And in that moment, Matt understood that the person he loved had never been on his side. Jake had always been around, but at some point, he stopped being just a friend and started acting like an unofficial third roommate in Matt and Emily's home. He would walk in without knocking, claiming Emily told him the door was always open. Sometimes Matt would come home from work and find Jake sprawled on the couch in his socks, eating leftovers that weren't his. Other times, Jake would help himself to Matt's tools, Matt's computer, even Matt's cologne, like the entire place was his personal convenience store. Matt tried to overlook it at first because he knew Emily cared about Jake, and he didn't want to create unnecessary tension. But the boundaryless behavior escalated so gradually that Matt didn't realize how much it bothered him until one night when Jake appeared in the kitchen at nearly midnight, rummaging through the fridge as if he lived there. Matt had been asleep, but the noise woke him, and when he walked out, Jake didn't even look guilty. He just said, "Emily told me I could stop by any time." Matt stood there, feeling like a stranger in his own home. He wasn't angry yet, just tired. Tired of feeling like his relationship came second to whatever Emily and Jake had going on. The next day, Matt chose his words carefully. He waited until he and Emily were both calm, sitting on the couch after dinner, and said, "I think we need to set some boundaries with Jake. Not shut him out. Just make sure he respects our space." Emily froze, as if he had said something far worse. She immediately bristled, crossing her arms and glaring at him like he'd insulted her personally. "What do you mean boundaries?" she snapped. "He's my best friend. He's been there long before you." Matt kept his voice soft because he didn't want this to become a fight. He explained how Jake's unannounced visits made him uncomfortable, how he felt displaced in his own home, how it wasn't about jealousy, but about privacy. But Emily wouldn't even hear it. Instead, she twisted every word he said into an accusation. She claimed he was trying to isolate her. She said he was trying to control her social life. She insisted Jake did nothing wrong and that Matt was overreacting. The more Matt tried to reassure her, the more defensive she became. At one point, she stood up and said, "You're acting like some controlling boyfriend who wants to dictate who I can see." "I won't live like that." Her reaction stunned him, not because she was upset, but because it was so disproportionate to what he'd said. He wasn't asking her to stop being friends with Jake. He wasn't even upset with her. He was simply asking for respect. But Emily treated the request like an attack. That moment lingered with him long after the conversation ended. He felt dismissed, unheard, and strangely alone. He didn't know it yet, but this was the first crack in the foundation of their relationship, the first sign that Emily did not see the two of them as a team. And while Matt tried to brush it off, pretending things would settle, deep down he already sensed the shift. Something wasn't right, and it was only a matter of time before everything fell apart. Emily's post didn't go viral in the traditional sense, but within their circle, it spread like wildfire. By the time Matt woke up the next morning, his phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications he didn't recognize. Tags, comments, screenshots from mutual friends asking if he was okay. Confused, he opened the app and saw her face in a dimly lit selfie accompanied by the words, "I feel trapped. I need freedom." Some people don't understand what it means to love without control. It hit him like a punch to the chest. He read it twice, 3 times, hoping he misunderstood. But no, she was talking about him. And she didn't just post it to vent. She made it public. Hundreds of her friends poured into the comments, validating her imaginary suffering. They wrote things like, "You deserve better. Leave him. No man has the right to control you, and proud of you for speaking up." People who had never met Matt were suddenly experts on their relationship. What stunned him even more was that Emily was actively responding to those comments, liking them, hearting them, engaging with them like she'd been waiting for this stage. He sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen as a numbness spread through him. The night before, all he had done was bring up a simple boundary about Jake. He had been calm, respectful, soft with his words, because he didn't want Emily to feel attacked. And yet here, she was painting him as some suffocating tyrant, holding her hostage in her own home. He felt something inside him begin to detach. Not anger, clarity. A chilling, quiet clarity that told him something fundamental. Emily wasn't looking for solutions. She wasn't looking for communication. She was looking for an audience. And she'd found one. As he scrolled through the comments, he noticed a pattern emerging. People didn't just defend her, they worshipped the narrative she created. It made her the center of concern. The victim. The heroine. The brave woman breaking free from the imaginary chains of a man who, in reality, had done nothing but try to protect their privacy. Matt realized then that Emily didn't want a partner. She wanted validation. She wanted to be admired, adored, constantly emotionally boosted by whoever happened to be paying attention that day. And he, without knowing it, had been cast as the villain in her story the moment he questioned anything she did. For the first time, he understood that the future he was trying to build was one-sided. She didn't want a home with him. She wanted a pedestal. And he was only useful as long as he stayed silent and agreeable. He closed the app, placed the phone on the nightstand, and exhaled, slow, steady, final. If Emily wanted freedom, he would give it to her in the clearest, quietest way possible. Not through an argument. Not through another conversation she would twist. But through action. And that decision, formed in the calm of that morning, would change everything that followed. Matt didn't respond to Emily's post with anger or confusion. He simply typed, "Got it," and set his phone down. There was nothing left to explain, nothing to clarify, nothing worth defending. If she believed he was the cage, then he would open the door and let her walk out. Not with drama, not with shouting, but with quiet, calculated steps that would reshape both of their lives. The first thing he did was open the email from their leasing office. They had recently asked whether the couple wanted to renew their lease for another year. Matt clicked no, filled out the form to decline renewal, and scheduled a move-out inspection date. It took less than 5 minutes, but it felt like the heaviest decision he had made in years. Yet, strangely, it also felt right. He wasn't leaving in anger. He was leaving because the home no longer felt like his. And he refused to beg for space and a life he was supposed to be sharing. Next, he opened the website for the wedding venue. The deposit had been paid months ago. He remembered how excited he had been when they toured the place, imagining their families gathered there, imagining Emily walking toward him in a white gown. Now he clicked the cancellation policy and submitted the form without hesitation. A small financial loss was nothing compared to the emotional drain he'd been carrying. Then came the caterer, the photographer, the florist, the tux fitting appointment, each one canceled with short, polite messages. No explanations. No apologies. Just quiet closure. Matt started calling moving companies, scheduling quotes, and packing his belongings into boxes. He worked methodically, starting with his office, then the living room, then the shared closet where his clothes hung next to Emily's dresses. He moved slowly when he reached the closet, Not because he doubted his decision, but because it was surreal to physically step out of a life he had invested years into. He folded shirts, wrapped picture frames, unplugged electronics, and labeled everything carefully. He didn't touch Emily's things. He didn't want to. This wasn't revenge. This was release. While Matt packed, Emily was busy soaking up praise online, completely unaware of the quiet unraveling happening around her. Her phone kept lighting up with supportive messages from friends, people cheering her on for her bravery, people encouraging her to cut ties with the man she believed was holding her back. Meanwhile, Matt was removing himself from her narrative entirely. The confirmation emails began rolling in. Your lease end date has been scheduled. Your wedding reservation has been canceled. Your deposit will be partially refunded. Matt read each one with an unusual calmness, like closing chapters in a book he no longer belonged in. 2 days later, Emily finally noticed. She checked her email and saw a flood of confirmations: lease termination, wedding cancellations, notice of a home inspection. She ran into the living room, wide-eyed, demanding to know what he'd done. But Matt didn't raise his voice. He didn't defend himself. He simply said, "You wanted freedom. I'm giving it to you." And for the first time, Emily realized he meant it. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't spite. This was the moment she learned that Matt's silence was more powerful than any argument she could ever start. Emily's reaction was instant and explosive. The moment she read the cancellation emails, she stormed into the living room with her phone clenched in her hand, her face flushed with outrage. She demanded to know why he would ruin their life over something so small. She accused him of overreacting, of humiliating her, of trying to teach her a lesson. Her voice cracked between anger and panic, but never once did she offer an apology. Not a single word acknowledging her public attack on him. Not one moment of accountability. Matt stood still, letting her words fall to the floor between them. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He had no reason to. She had already told the world she wanted freedom, and he was simply making space for her to have it. Emily paced the room like someone trapped in her own storm. She kept insisting that he was being cruel, that he was intentionally hurting her, that she had never imagined he would take things this far. To her, the Instagram post was harmless expression, a dramatic flare sent up for attention, not consequences. She wanted sympathy, not reality. But reality had arrived anyway. Later that afternoon, Jake showed up unannounced, as usual. He barged through the door, ready to talk some sense into Matt, acting like he had authority in a home that was never his. Jake accused Matt of punishing Emily, of being immature, of not understanding her emotional needs. Matt listened until he no longer needed to. Then he simply said, "Give me the key." Jake froze, stunned that Matt wasn't playing along with his usual dominance. Matt repeated, calm and steady, "Give me the key and leave." There was no yelling, no threats, just a boundary finally enforced. Jake hesitated, glancing at Emily as if expecting her to intervene. But Matt didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't negotiate. Jake eventually fumbled the spare key from his pocket and placed it on the table, then walked out, muttering under his breath as if he were the victim. It was the first time he'd been told no, and it rattled him. Emily's meltdown continued for days. She begged one minute and lashed out the next. She insisted that Matt was abandoning her, ruining their plans, throwing everything away. But she still never addressed the real issue: her betrayal, her disrespect, her complete lack of awareness of how deeply she had hurt him. She expected him to carry the emotional weight of the relationship, as he always had, and she assumed he would eventually cave. Because he always had. But this time, Matt was done bending. He slept on the couch most nights, giving her space while he packed slowly and methodically. Meanwhile, Emily made no effort to find a new place to live. She didn't search for apartments, didn't make calls, didn't pack a single box. She simply waited. Waited for the man she thought she controlled to soften. Waited for him to put a halt to everything and reassure her that he wasn't going anywhere. Waited for him to carry the burden of her choices the way he always did. But Matt had already chosen himself. And Emily, for the first time, began to realize that the freedom she demanded came with a cost she never expected. She would have to live with it. The breaking point came on a night when Matt wasn't home. Emily and Jake had been drinking, their laughter echoing through the hallway loud enough for a neighbor to later mention it. They weren't celebrating anything, they were spiraling. And somewhere between their alcohol-fueled bitterness and denial, they fixated on the one thing in the apartment that still symbolized the future Matt once hoped for, the scale model of the house he had designed for them. It sat on the desk in his office, carefully crafted over months, every detail precise. It wasn't just a project. It was a promise. And in their drunken haze, Emily and Jake decided it was something they had permission to destroy. Matt filed the small claims case with no bitterness, no dramatic announcement, and no emotional plea. He simply submitted the paperwork, attached the evidence, and requested that Emily pay her portion of the damages, $375. To him, it wasn't about the money. It was about accountability, something Emily had avoided for as long as he'd known her. When the court date arrived, Emily walked in wearing an air of indignation, as though she expected the judge to instinctively take her side. Jake came with her, sitting beside her like some self-appointed legal advisor. They whispered to each other, occasionally glancing at Matt with smug confidence, convinced that they could spin the situation just as easily as they spun narratives online. Matt settled into his new apartment with a quiet sense of liberation. The space felt different from anything he'd lived in before, clean, calm, untouched by chaos. He woke up each morning without tension in his chest, brewed his coffee in silence, and felt the kind of peace he hadn't realized he'd been missing. There were no dramatic conversations, no emotional landmines, no unpredictable storms waiting around the corner. Just stillness. Just clarity. He unpacked the last of his boxes slowly, choosing where things belonged not out of necessity, but out of intention. Every choice felt like a small reaffirmation that his life was finally his again. He didn't check Emily's social media. He didn't revisit screenshots or replay arguments in his head. He didn't wonder whether she regretted anything. Her story, her drama, her need for validation, all of it stayed behind with the life he walked away from. Matt had learned something powerful. Love meant nothing without respect. And peace was worth more than any promise. He closed the window, took a deep breath, and stepped into a future he built on his own terms, quiet, steady, and finally free.